This episode of Everyman's Arsenal podcast is proudly sponsored by Nocturn Industries. Introducing the Daisho Bridge, seamlessly connect two night vision monocles to create a powerful dual tube setup. And don't miss out on the Chimera, Nocturn's panoramic night vision goggles. Upgrade your night vision game at nocturnindustries.com and use discount code TLDCO. Nocturn Industries, lighting the night for Everyman's Arsenal. All right, I think we are recording. Welcome to another episode of Everyman's Arsenal podcast, a podcast dedicated to learning more about the folks that we talk about on our YouTube channel, maybe the people behind the products, and those that are influential in the Second Amendment arena. And I am super excited. I'm kind of geeking out over here to have William Kirk from Washington Gun Law. So thanks, William, for joining us.
Jason, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for all you guys are doing out there to support the Second Amendment community.
Yeah, I was telling William before we officially hit the record button, every Thursday night we have a live chat where we interact with our viewers. We just had one last night. So it's a really good chance for us to have a Q&A with whatever our last week's video is. But we have this one spot at about the hour mark into our live chat where we get into 2A news and updates. And it's one of our people on our channel, Joe, is one of the content creators. We've kind of joked because he's retired military. He's out of law enforcement now, and we call him Sovereign Citizen Joe because he has a gun wall behind him, kind of similar to your background. He'll turn on the red lights, and he usually has a list of dumb gun laws that are happening across the country. For those that might be unfamiliar with you and Washington gun law, can you explain a little bit about how you started in that YouTube arena talking about gun laws in Washington?
Yeah, so it's a weird story because if we go back in my time machine 4 years ago, I never in a million years expected to be doing what I'm doing right now. So I'd been a criminal defense attorney in the Seattle area for 20 plus years. I'd had a very, very successful practice, very lucrative practice. Was doing predominantly a lot of impaired driving cases because that really was the one criminal type of case where I could actually work with pretty good people. Then along came the pandemic, and up there in Seattle, as you know, we basically shut our entire state down. We just completely shut the whole state down. Well, you live there, you know that for a fact. So when you shut down all the bars, the restaurants, the concert venues, the sporting events, there really wasn't a lot of business for me. And so a lot of people in my industry, their businesses started crumbling. Of course, during that same time, we had the George Floyd riots. We had our Summer of Love in Seattle. And I'd always had a second practice. I had a website built called Washington Gun Law. And the phone started ringing off the hook, and it was the same questions over and over and over. What do I do if I drive into an Antifa rally? What do I do if they're throwing Molotov cocktails into my business? Because this is the life we were living, as you recall, in Seattle that summer. I couldn't keep up with the volume of calls, so I really just started putting out YouTube videos so that I could put on my answering service, hey, if you got a question about this or this, go to YouTube. And one thing led to another, and I had nothing else to do during that pandemic, so at that point, I just started doing a video every day, and I was listening to my viewers, like, hey, can you do a video on this? Hey, can you do a video on this? Sure. And the thing that took me to a national level is I did a video about suppressors one time and then was inundated shortly thereafter with ads on solvent traps. And I did a video that said, hey, solvent traps, bad idea, don't do it. I think the ATF's going to get ticked off about this. And nobody really liked that video. In fact, I got accused at that point of actually working for the ATF. And then you fast forward about 6 months later, and I get this notice from YouTube that the video picked up like 35,000 views in one day. I'm like, wow. And at that time, that was a ton of views for Washington Gun Law. And so I started looking in, why did the video get so popular? Well, lo and behold, the ATF had raided Diversified Machine, pulled the shipping manifestos, sent nasty letters to everybody and said, we need to talk to you. And so the first video that I had that I would say kind of went viral on a national level was the I told you so video, which is I told you not to do this. And here's what to do and not to do if you're going to have to deal with the ATF. And that video got, I think it was 130,000 views in about a 24-hour period. And that was kind of what Washington Gun Law kind of took off from there. And then I just started really following a lot of the national issues, and just one thing has led to another, and we got a very loyal following. We're closing in on 400,000 subscribers. I think I actually got more subscribers in Illinois than I do in Washington right now. But all we do at Washington Gun Law is we just do law to English translation so that everybody, regardless of how good you are with the English language or what your level of education is, doesn't matter, As soon as you're done watching our video, you're going to understand what that case really stands for or what that law really means. And we're going to do it in simple, plain English so that everybody can just understand it.
Yeah, and I love that about your videos because, even someone like myself that's been in law enforcement, there's the enforcement of the law side, but then there's the kind of what happens afterwards, after the person's arrested or after the search warrant is done, the legal side of it, which is, I would say, even for your typical law enforcement officers, kind of over their head when you see some of these Latin words that are used in the legal system. I don't understand it. So I love how you were able to take that and you say you're able to use the language, and then comes back to you and you explain this is what it means for you.
Yeah, and what you find out usually is it's just a fancy way of saying something that's really quite simple. Yeah.
But what I struggle with, and I think a lot of people in the nation struggle with, is okay, so what is safe and what's not safe? And kind of going back to what you were talking about with the pandemic, it seemed like every 2 weeks, we were turn on the news. Okay, is it masks or no masks this week? Okay, it's
vax or no vax? What is it? Right?
Yeah. So I mean, I remember when it was initially, they weren't going to push vaccinations, that you can opt not to get a vaccination if you're a state employee or a federal employee. You just have to get tested every week, something like, or every 2 weeks. Okay, a lot of people were saying, yeah, I'm good with that. And then it turned into, no, never mind, forget that. We told you that. That's not true. We're now going to mandate that you have to get vaccinated. And it's interesting to see, especially here in Washington State, how many people were, I don't know, I would say so willing to comply, but especially in areas like Seattle and Olympias, people are so willing to comply. And then you look at what's happening on the gun law side, the laws that are being put into effect here in Washington State, and it seems like there's a lot of civil disobedience happening. What are you seeing on your side?
Well, I think it's interesting that we talk about both of these things simultaneously, because I think in many ways they mirror each other. I think that what the state of Washington tried to do through the pandemic was all about garnering as much control over its citizens as humanly possible. And I think when you take a look at all gun control efforts, not only in the state of Washington, but nationwide, gun control is only about the control. It's never been about the guns. And so anytime, and so that's why you see these totalitarian states. It's not like, let's take, for example, I know you got a couple partners out in Nebraska. You don't find a state like Nebraska that was hell on wheels when it came to the pandemic, but is really cool with gun owners, right? They're either all in or they're all out. So when you take a look at the state like Washington, Oregon, California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, these really deep blue states that candidly just despise the citizens that want to exercise their own form of liberty, they will do anything humanly possible to crush their soul. And I know that sounds very, hyperbolic to say that, but that really is what they're doing. They're trying to beat them into submission.
Yeah, and what we've seen with a lot of our viewers, interaction with our viewers, is how confusing it is across all those states. And one that comes to mind, in the city of San Jose, California, I don't know if this got overturned or not, but they were mandating at one point that if you were going to conceal carry, you had to have CCW, some type of CCW insurance. It was mandated. And then you have a state like Washington or New York where CCW carry insurance is outlawed. You are not allowed to purchase it. So people that...
It's all about safety though, right? It's all about safety.
And so a lot of our viewers are saying, okay, this is very confusing. How can I wrap my head around this? And for people that are seeking that type of advice, what type of advice would you give them?
Well, the best advice to give is, first of all, for you to do your own research. Because as much as I love the platform of YouTube and all the other social media platforms, there's a lot of people out there that are going to tell you how to think. And I think you want to look very carefully for the people who are just giving you all the stuff to think about. Because ultimately, when it comes to your willingness to comply with the law, that's an individual decision that an individual has to make, and they just need to have the information to do it. And it's one of the reasons that on my channel, I'm always going to tell people, listen, I'm not trying to tell you how to think. I'm going to give you all the stuff to think about. If you decide you want to scribble inside the lines, great. If you decide you want to scribble outside the lines, as long as I've educated you as to what the consequences are of that choice, well, you do so at your own peril. And we all have the ability to create our own destiny, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's that's something we touch on a lot is we can tell you kind of what we're reading and our understanding of it, but it's always best for you to go and do your own research.
That's right.
And learn for yourself. You know, even as something as simple, I have teenagers at home now, and so, you know, kids asking me how to spell something, instead of telling them, I always tell them, like, why don't you go get a dictionary and look it up, because you're gonna remember it easier, and hopefully you can then educate your friends. And I think it's the same way in the gun world, that learn about the gun laws in your local area, educate the people in the local area about those. One that here locally that kind of affects us, when the assault weapon ban went into effect, there was a lot of discussion about how your 1022s, which are probably some of the most prolific,
very common
use firearms in the country, would be considered an assault weapon. And there was a liberal friend of mine that wanted to teach his daughter, this is during the pandemic, wanted to teach his daughter how to shoot, and asked if he could borrow my 1022. And I said, absolutely, yeah, we just need to go down to the gun store, you know, we'll transfer it over to you, pay the fee, you go and you can use it, and then when we're done, we transfer it back. And that was mind-boggling to him that they would have to do that. And it's like, this is what you voted for, right? This is your party that is pushing this.
Although, you know, the 1022 is not an assault weapon.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is it though? That's the thing. A lot of people would be like, if you have a generalized understanding of how the state of Washington defined assault weapons, you would think the Ruger 1022 is an assault weapon, except you would have missed on one word. And this is where lawyers can sometimes help you, because it is a semi-automatic centerfire rifle that accepts a detachable magazine. And what you have there is a semi-automatic rimfire rifle that accepts a detachable magazine. So, but I can't tell you how many calls I fielded about the Ruger 1022, because you're right, there are millions and millions of them in circulation, because it's a very reliable firearm. A lot of young people learn to shoot on that firearm.
Yeah, that's what I taught my kids to shoot. And it's interesting too, talking to my dad. I grew up in California. My family's been in California for generations, and my dad told me, I think it was a JCPenney catalog. He bought a 1022 back in like late 60s, early 70s. And it shipped to the JCPenney, and he just went and picked it up, you know, as a 16-year-old or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. I mean, that's a whole nother tangent we go down on gun laws being less. You know, a lot of people say, well, it's so much easier to get a gun today than it was 50 years ago. And
that's patently false. That is patently false. It is considerably more difficult. Listen, I'm here at North Idaho Arms in Post Falls. Brian Zielinski runs the place here. I've been here. I saw a couple of transfers go down. Now, they don't have waiting periods here in Idaho, which is awesome. But I did see Brian run 4473s and do background checks on everybody here today. And until those cleared, they didn't walk out of here with their firearms. So to suggest that it's easy to go buy a firearm, it's not. I mean, it's easier in some states than others, so long as you are lawfully permitted to possess a firearm. Because if you're not going to be able to buy one legally, period. It doesn't matter what state you're in. You're not.
And I think that gets into another question that I had is, I think what you're touching on is a common misconception that a lot of people on the left have about firearm purchasing. You know, you'll hear about, we want to implement universal background checks, or we want to end the gun show loophole. And especially here in Washington State, you know, I've purchased, when gun shows, when it was easier to purchase guns, you still had to go through a background check. So can you touch on some of those other misconceptions that people think about that are just patently not true?
The only way to purchase a firearm without undergoing a background check is to do so illegally. It's just that simple. Okay, it's just that simple. In Washington State, for example, like let's say you had something in your collection that I really, really liked, I was very fond of, and you were willing to sell it to me. Okay, listen, I know you're a lawful, responsible gun owner. I hope you think that way of me. I can assure you that I am lawfully allowed to possess firearms. But you and I are still going to do that transfer at an FFL, and they are going to run a background check on me. And I cannot take possession of that firearm until that background check comes back. And then, of course, in Washington, we also have a 10-day waiting period. Right. So we're going to wait some extra days for that, too. Here in Idaho, they're not going to make you wait 10 days, okay? But are you going to go through a background check? You absolutely positively are. And if the background check comes back with anything other than proceed, you're not walking out of here with a firearm. And it's just that simple. And I don't care what state you go to, because that's the way it works.
Yeah. And this kind of goes into, I think you touched on this earlier, that the idea that all of these laws are about making the state or making your community safer. One of the things that we're probably going to try doing, although I can't do it here, but maybe next time I'm in Nebraska, is take a gun and load it up, have 3 10-round magazines, and with no real warm-up period, just go through your reloads, run through those 30 rounds, and time yourself, and then have 2 15-round magazines and run through 30 rounds as well, and see how much faster are you. I think it's going to be negligible, and this idea that we had as me and some of my folks here on YouTube were cooking up this idea, it seems like the more you train, the less effective some of these laws
absolutely
will be. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, you could take a person out to the range for a week straight and they could learn how to reload. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of practice. I mean, it takes some practice, but it's not a super high skilled thing. It's just some muscle memory, right?
Right.
So, but again, here's the thing I would tell to all your viewers is you go ahead and take a look at the United States Department of Justice statistics on gun crimes, okay? So this isn't Bill's opinion of anything. This is empirical data from the United States Department of Justice. And what they'll show you is that 88.8% of all 88.8% of all gun crimes that are committed in the United States are committed by an individual who, at the time the crime is committed, is actually unlawfully possessing the firearm, okay? That's almost 9 out of 10 gun crimes. So, do states like Washington write 90% of their gun laws to affect the identifiable demographic group that we know is causing the problem? No. No, instead they write 100% of the gun laws to affect people like you and your neighbors. Yeah. And you guys aren't the problem. And that's not an opinion. The data actually proves that out. Concealed carry holders in the United States have the lowest crime of any identifiable demographic group, including a lower crime rate per capita than college-educated Asians. And you know how low the crime rate is among college-educated Asians? It's like .something% per 100,000 people.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is the same with you. When I'm carrying concealed off duty, I do feel like I'm more focused on my surroundings. I think you've done some of these videos where you talk about some of these shootings that have occurred, and I think deconfliction is paramount. You know, how can I think the moment that the gun comes out, it just raises things up. So, what tools are there out there for people to learn more about deconflicting than drawing your weapon and threatening people?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of people need to do a bunch of things. I think that, as I mentioned, it may be a right, but it's a right that comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility. And I think if you're going to be an everyday carrier, life turns into a game of chess versus a game of checkers. Right now, for a lot of us, life's a game of checkers. And checkers is an easy game. What's your next move? Right? That's why your 8-year-old can kick your butt sometimes in checkers. Chess, though, is a different game. Chess, you got to think 5, 10 moves in front. You're setting moves up. And that's the way life becomes when you're an everyday carrier. So you need to be much more aware of, do I really want to go into this mini mart here? Or maybe should I drive another couple miles down the road and go into one in a better neighborhood? I recently was in a 7-Eleven in my neighborhood where 2 guys were getting into it at a 7-Eleven, and they started throwing racial slurs at each other. Okay, and I could see that things were going to escalate. I had a firearm on me. I didn't know what was going to happen. I put stuff back on the shelf and just walked out of the store.
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone goes to the range all the time and they practice so that they can stay out of the morgue, and that's great. But you got to practice to stay out of prison also. Okay, and that means you should, on an annual basis, do at least one class with a lawyer who understands the self-defense laws in your state. The self-defense laws may have not changed, they may change, but you want to just be reinforcing those. I think in addition to working with good tactical instructors that are going to teach you, the draw and how to shoot properly and all of that. You do need to work with people who are real experts in de-escalation, conflict avoidance, and things like that. I will tell you as a defense attorney, the best way to handle conflict out in the public is to avoid conflict if at all possible.
Yeah,
because then you don't have to call guys like me. Yeah. And guys like you don't have to show up with your red and blues on.
Right. And it seems like that's not thought of or talked about enough in the gun world. It's all about how fast can I draw, how fast can I shoot, not how to de-escalate the situation.
Well, I think that you and I can both agree that the Second Amendment community, which is rapidly modernizing, and that's a good thing, still has a little bit of that machismo element in there where, it's always like, let me show you what a badass I really am. And listen, I don't care how big of a badass you are. If you're going to prison for the next 15 years, we're going to find out just how much of a badass you are over the next 15 years. So surviving the gun battle but ending up in prison isn't really surviving the gun battle.
Right. No, I love that thought process. I'm curious, kind of going back as we've been talking and kind of learning your thought process on things. When was it that you decided to, I know you said it was about 4 years ago that you had this website set up, but was there something specifically that happened that made you think, I should set up this website and kind of prep myself to go down this Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment channel and video format?
Yeah, I think that as a criminal defense attorney, you spend a large chunk of your time wrapping yourself in the protections that the Constitution provides us. The Constitution is the defense attorney's biggest friend. And when I saw, as I began to get into this field, and I saw the absolute complete warfare that was being committed upon our citizens' inalienable rights, I just got very passionate about it. Because can you imagine if we just took guns out and changed it to voting? And can you imagine if you needed to go get a license before you could vote, or a license before you could go to church, or that there was a quota on how frequently you could go to church because we don't want you going to a high-capacity church, or something to that effect? Why is it that the Second Amendment is held to its own set of rules and analysis that no other amendment in the Bill of Rights is held to? And so that's when I really began to start geeking out on the case law, and I started taking a look at how states like California and stuff had upheld all of these laws. I realized that there was a complete effort ongoing to literally eviscerate a constitutional amendment. And I think it's no accident that the Second Amendment is placed where it is immediately after the First Amendment. And for anyone who honestly thinks that it was just there to protect hunters or just there to protect the militia, nobody has any understanding of the historical context of which we ratified that Second Amendment, which is right after we won a war against the tyrannical king.
Yeah. So taking the viewpoint, I think, of a everyday civilian, how is it then that you can see some of these laws that I feel like fly smack in the face of not only the Second Amendment, but some of the recent Supreme Court rulings? There's laws that are currently being implemented or tried to be implemented that I don't think there's any history or tradition of.
There isn't. No.
The one that comes to mind is Hawaii and the whole Spirit of Aloha thing. How can people come to terms with that? Pro Second Amendment people come to terms when it does feel like it's being eviscerated.
There is no coming to terms with a ruling like what we got out of Hawaii v. Wilson. The Aloha spirit trumps the Second Amendment. Let us remember that the Seventh Circuit this year has ruled that the Second Amendment does not even apply when we're talking about semi-automatic rifles. Yeah. That's a ruling of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Take a look at all the gamesmanship that's been played in the Ninth Circuit with the Miller case, with the Duncan case, and all of that. So, no, there is an absolute warfare going on against the Second Amendment rights, and that kind of has a full circle back to how elections really do have consequences. And if you think it's always about the Supreme Court, it's really not just about the Supreme Court. It's a lot about these lower-level courts, these Court of Appeals, these district courts, all of which are federally appointed positions. There's been a lot of debate whether President Trump was a good Second Amendment president or a bad Second Amendment president. We're not going to get into that here, but I will say this, and I'm not trying to either criticize or promote President Trump, but I will say this: if you look at just the objective data of the judges that he appointed in his first 4 years in office, they are remarkably pro-Second Amendment. Okay. They have about 2/3 of the time cited in favor of the Second Amendment, which means that if your inalienable Second Amendment rights are valuable to you, President Trump, between the justices he put on the United States Supreme Court and what he's put down in the lower courts, has made a huge impact on preserving those rights. And I don't think that's a debatable point.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, I think for voters, what matters most to you? For me, I'm almost at the point where Second Amendment, I'm a single issue voter, Second Amendment. Who's going to be the strongest on that? Because I've seen it eroded so much over these, I'd say, the past 10 years.
Absolutely.
And especially being a Washington resident, I think the question that comes to mind for me a lot is there hope?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think as Washington residents, we need to kind of make our residents aware of something, which is, and I see this on a national level too, a lot of people think that your rights are going to be taken from you from the top down, but they're not usually. They're taken from you from the bottom up. It's your state legislatures. In fact, if you really want to get more localized, they'll start with your zoning commissions. Your zoning commissions will start zoning the gun stores out of your city. Okay? Your zoning commissions will start zoning the gun ranges out of your county. Okay? And then your local state legislatures. Our problem in Washington has not been caused by Washington, D.C. Our problem in Washington State is not caused by the ATF. Our problem in Washington, everything is created down at the Death Star there in Olympia. Okay? That's where it's coming from. And you take a look at California. Where's all of California's problems come from? Sacramento. That's right. New York. All their problems come from Albany. Okay? So local elections matter. And I think that we as a country do a very poor job of really researching any of our elections. But when it comes to local races, it's almost kind of like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Who am I going to pick? Right? So you do need to be heavily involved in local elections. In Washington State, do I think we have hope? That's a tough question. I will tell you this. I've never been more hopeful with an election cycle as I have been this year. Okay. I honestly think that we as a state have the opportunity, with good voter turnout, to win a couple of very, very big races that will, I don't think necessarily improve Washington State, but it will stop Washington State from deteriorating any further. The first race is obviously the one that everyone talks about, which is the governor's race. And I think that Dave Reichert actually has a very legitimate chance to win. And if you take a look at a uniparty state like Washington, in which we basically hand select our next governor, it's almost like a form of nepotism in Washington State, Bob Ferguson is polling remarkably soft for a person who's basically been anointed that position. I am shocked every time I look, and I'm not talking about the external polling that a lot of people see. I'm talking about internal polling that I see, because the campaigns will share some of that with me. And he is polling incredibly, incredibly soft. And if you watch his constant attacks on Dave Reichert on social media, he's scared. He's running scared. And so a lot of it's going to be due some of the people who were upset that their other Republican candidate, Mr. Byrd, did not get the nomination. Are they going to be willing to jump in and support Mr. Reichert? That's going to be critical. If the answer is yes to that, and we get good voter turnout, I think Dave Reichert has a real chance of winning. And that gives us the power of the veto, okay? Because then all the crazy stuff that comes off the floor can be vetoed by the governor. So that is a really, really important race. The second race, and one that doesn't get nearly as much attention, but candidly, of all Republican candidates, the person who performed the best in Washington State was our Attorney General candidate, Pete Serrano. Okay, Pete's is the president and founder of the Silent Majority Foundation. He cut his teeth suing the state of Washington predominantly during the pandemic. And I asked Pete recently in an interview, I asked him a one-question interview, what's the first thing you're going to do if you're elected into office to make Washington State a better place to live? And his answer was, I'm going to give a copy of the Constitution to every assistant attorney general and make sure they read it. What a novel concept. Yeah. So do I think there's hope? Yeah, I think there's hope so long as we pull off a couple of big wins in November. If we don't, and everything stays the same, I'm afraid that Washington will now cross the Rubicon to the point where we can't come back. And there's a high probability that someone's going to turn on YouTube one day and see my channel's called Idaho Gun Law.
Well, it's interesting. I own a piece of property in Idaho. I lived there for a number of years, and that's something that my family and I have talked about. You know, I mean, we've been in Washington now. I separated from the military in Washington back in 2014, and with an 8-month stint in California, basically been in Washington resident since 2014. And so it's amazing to see where the state has gone in the last 10 years. And not being from here, you know,
it's sad.
I think hearing more about how long you have been here and your family has been here, to see the change over generations.
Yeah, my family got to the state of Washington in 1883 on a wagon train. William Halliday Kirk Sr., who'd fought valiantly in the Civil War as an officer for the Union Army, had been given 40 acres of land by the United States government as payment for his service to the country. He got on a wagon train in St. Louis, Missouri in 1883, made it out to Cheney, Washington by that winter. By the spring of 1884, got up to Elmira, not far from the Grand Coulee Dam, and settled the Kirk homestead. And every Kirk that's ever lived in the United States is buried in the state of Washington. And I find it amazingly offensive that I find myself at night on my tablet looking at Redfin and Zillow, and I'm not looking at Washington properties. I'm not. And it's just a darn shame. Washington, growing up as a kid and a teenager and all that, we were always a little baby blue. But it was kind of a harmless baby blue. You know, we were a little quirky. And I kind of like that whole mentality that we have. There's a sign right outside of Aberdeen, Washington, that says, "Come as you are." And I kind of like that about Washington, because we were that way. You could, if you wanted to be a right-wing, Bible-thumping zealot or a left-wing, blue-haired, nose-ring, they, them, there was a place for you in Washington State. There was. And you could be yourself. But those days are gone. They don't want people like you and I around here anymore. And they're making this environment as hostile as humanly possible. And it's working. You take a look at the exodus that's occurring. You take a look at the property values over here in North Idaho now and how they've doubled in just the last couple of years. Why is that? Well, it's because people are making the escape. I was in Tennessee recently, fastest growing state in the United States right now. And there's a lot of people coming in from blue states. Now, the problem is, and I would caution for viewers in states like Idaho or other states that are experiencing this, is, you know, once the secret gets out, there's no stopping there's no stopping the growth.
Yeah.
But you can control how you grow. And you can make sure that the toxic politics that are chasing those people out of their original communities don't come with them. Because that's what happened in Washington State. Washington State had this mass California influx. Right? Yeah. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, the tech industry was blowing up. You know, we had Microsoft, we had Amazon all kind of kicking off. And so tons of people came in and like, oh, this is such a better living and all of this stuff. But they brought their terrible politics with them. And fast forward a dozen years, look where we are now. Yeah. And we're only touching on the firearms things. Listen, we can get into other issues that are outside this channel scope, but we got some laws as it relates to public education, as it relates to some trans issues and things like that, that would make the hair on the back of a lot of people's neck stand up. Yeah. And that's what we've become as a state.
That I've been talking to my wife about. You know, I think if education keeps going the way that it's going to be going, I think there's going to be more buy-in in my family to let's look somewhere else. You know, and that I'm seeing that. I told you I have one of our content creators lives in Colorado.
Yeah, so, another state that's kind of teetering on going over the edge there too.
And so he's looking at Texas and Tennessee and New Mexico and, you know, pretty much anywhere else that he can go that's going to provide more freedoms. And it's sad that, you know, I thought we went away from the whole voting with your feet. But it seems like in states like this that are predominantly blue and controlled by a single party, that's what we're going to have to do.
Well, it's because so much of their platform is about imposing their view of the world upon everybody else. It's not about I'm going to allow people to live free and make their own decisions. It's the progressive movement in general has lost faith in the individual. I mean, that's the biggest difference between the conservative and the progressive. If you want to boil it down to its most simplest point, the conservative still has faith in the individual to form their own destiny. And yes, some will make poor choices and they will fall through the cracks because of it. And that's the way the world works. The progressive has long since lost any faith in the individual and believes that only government can really dictate and teach us how to live. And that's just I cannot imagine living with that mindset. What a horribly depressing lifestyle that would be.
Yeah. And so, you said there's hope on the horizon. If Riker gets in, Pete Serrano, I think you're absolutely right, is a great candidate.
Fantastic candidate, yeah.
I've heard that if we're able to get increased voter turnout on the east of the Cascades, that could override what might happen coming out of voter turnout out of Seattle or Olympia.
Well, yeah, I think that,
truth behind that?
Yeah, so I think there's some truth to it. First of all, having run campaigns in Washington State or working on campaigns in Washington State, the strategy on a statewide election is either you're going to have to get a larger percentage of votes in the Puget Sound region than a Republican normally does, or you're going to need massive voter turnout in eastern Washington. Now, I think there's some games that are being played in the elections, and I think that Secretary of State Steve Hobbs' willingness to do away with the 30-day residency requirement in order to register to vote probably increases the likelihood that we're going to have gamesmanship. I think we need both. I think we need big voter turnout in eastern Washington. I think we need Dave to get into the Puget Sound region and split votes. I am very encouraged by the polling numbers. I mean, he's polling in the 40 percentile in King County, wow, which is amazing, okay? Yeah. And candidly, I think the county of the 3 Puget Sound counties, King, Pearson, Snohomish County, I think the county that's ready to actually go red again is Pierce County. Okay. I think that there is a large sentiment in Pierce County that's fed up not only with what's coming out of Olympia, but I think they're also fed up with what's coming out of Seattle. And I think that sentiment is drawing them a lot more back to the center. Yeah. To the folks in eastern Washington, what I would say to you is this, is that Olympia has been ignoring you for 3 decades now. I don't know how people live in eastern Washington. They have to have felt so abandoned by their state government. And listen, you got great representatives. There's some local representatives that represent some of the districts here in East Washington, some of the best in the state, but they're minority voices. Yeah. And Eastern Washington really needs to just step up and send a message to Olympia that, hey, we still matter. And you do matter. Eastern Washington is absolutely the best part of this state. I freaking love it. I went to college at Washington State University. I went to law school in Spokane at Gonzaga. That was by design. It was by design because I love it here in Eastern Washington. So I'm asking all the Eastern Washington voters, get out there and vote. We need it. And recently we did there was a story in the New York Post about how there was 10 million registered gun owners or lawful responsible gun owners in the nation that aren't registered to vote. And they broke it down by state. And so here's the thing. The state with the lowest number was Montana. They still had 52,000 people that could be voting that weren't registered to vote. Wow. Now, that means Washington is higher than 52,000, okay? Some of the states were alarming. It was North Carolina, it was Wisconsin, it was Michigan, it was Pennsylvania, it was all these swing states, Georgia, all with over 500,000. And the biggest reason that people gave is that they believe their vote doesn't count and that the system is rigged, okay? Well, the other side already thinks your vote doesn't count. So why are you going to perpetuate that narrative? And is the system rigged? If the system is rigged, it's not rigged in how they count the ballots. The system is rigged in how they stuff the ballot boxes. And the only way we can offset that is either we got to cheat ourselves, which we're not going to do because we're above that, or we just simply got to get out and vote. I question now, having seen that there's 10 million unregistered voters, is the Republican Party truly the minority party in this country? Yeah. I don't know. You add 10 million more votes to it, it changes a lot of elections, doesn't it?
Yeah. And those are people that are focused on, I would hope as gun owners would be focused on those causes and issues that would better themselves and future gun owners. I still feel very hopeful when I'm looking at the numbers and I see how many new gun owners we have in the U.S. over the last 5 or 6 years, and not only how many new gun owners, but also those that are willing to take some type of training to be
Yes.
more effective with that firearm system.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, my aunt, for one, she has a little snub-nosed revolver, has never shot it. And she has this idea of this false sense of security, I would say, that gun ownership brings about some type of safety or some type of competency with the use. And that's just not the case.
No, it's not. Proficiency in the use of a firearm brings about safety for you and your family.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's
and I encourage everyone to train. And there's no such thing as too much training. There really isn't. Okay.
Yep,
Practice, train, and then again, practice to stay out of the morgue, but practice to stay out of prison also.
So, with this idea that more, on the left, this idea that more guns is less safety, I would say, how do we find balance between advocating for gun rights, but also showing the left that what their belief system is simply not true?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I don't know how many of those on the left are actually even open to having a debate or a dialogue about things. What I have said in a lot of public appearances that I have made is that people ask me, how are we going to win this battle? Okay. Well, the best way to win this battle is by not having to fight it. So get out and vote. Okay. Because if we got the right people in office, there's no battle to pick now, is there?
Yeah.
But is it going to be won through litigation, legislation, intimidation? No, we're not going to win the battle through any of those. We're going to win it through education. And we're going to win it through education because the truth of the matter is that we have the law, the Constitution, and common facts. They're all common sense. They're all on our side. Okay? Now, to that end, what I also say is that I think that every lawful and responsible gun owner has a moral obligation not only to educate themselves and to remain educated, but to also educate others. Okay? What I have found in dealing with the anti-gun groups is that about 10% of that group has been personally affected by gun violence. Okay? And I don't think there's any debating with them. I don't think there's any convincing them. I think they are emotionally locked into that position. And you as a law enforcement officer, you've met plenty of people who've been horribly inflicted by gun violence. So you could probably even have a better appreciation for where they're coming from than I can. Okay, but the other 90% are just naive. They're just naive. They don't know anything. Case in point, I was getting into it with my Google coach. Once you get to a certain number of subscribers, they give you a Google coach on YouTube, right? And I was complaining about their new advertising policy, and he goes, "Well, he was like, we don't ban all firearms on our advertising policy. We just don't want you guys advertising semi-automatic firearms." And I said to him, "Why don't you define for me what a semi-automatic firearm is, real quick?" And he couldn't. And then I explained to him, and he's down in Cali. He's a Bay Area kid, he's working for Google. And I was like, "Listen, I just want you to know that any firearm that you could walk into a California gun store and buy today is a semi-automatic firearm." And he's like, "Huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, let me explain how it works." And I explained it, and he was like, "Oh," and it was just so, and that's like firearms 101.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Here's a piece of advice that I would give all of your viewers. Whenever you have a person that does that whole, I don't understand why a person needs this. Because first of all, rights aren't based on needs, but that's it. So I had to do a presentation to a large group of Hindus in the Seattle community a couple months ago. Okay. And Hindus are very pacifistic in nature, and it's part of their mantra. And a lot of them came up to me beforehand. They knew who I was, and they're like, "I just want you to know that I could never buy a gun and I could never take another human life. I could never, ever, ever do it." I was like, "Okay, you say that, and that's fine. You be you." So when it finally got time for me to speak, I didn't have a lot of time, and I was like, "Listen, I'm going to just do away with my speech here, and I'm just going to give you 3 things to think about for all of you who came up to me and said you could never buy a gun and you could never take a human life." Okay, and I said, you're all you're people of faith, so we're all looking for these universal truths. Well, here's 3 universal truths. Number 1 is that your life experience is a unique human experience. There will be no other like it in the history of the world, and because of that, it is absolutely worth defending and preserving. Can we agree on that? Of course, everyone can agree on that, right? Yeah. Number 2, the lifestyle that you have chosen for your family, for you, how you're going to raise your kids, your religion, your dietary restrictions, how you discipline your kids, how you educate them, whatever it is. That is a unique human experience There will be no other like it in the history of the world, and therefore that too is worth preserving. Do you agree on that? And they all nodded their head. And then the third universal truth is, great, you and you alone are responsible for preserving it.
It's true.
It's true. And so I said to him, I said, hey, listen, I have no problem with you having hope and faith. I have no problem with that. Maybe hope and faith will get you out of that mess. But in case it doesn't, you might want to have a plan B.
Yeah.
And that's why you arm yourself. Okay? It is about and what people need to understand is the ability to arm ourselves. It's not about freedom. Freedom is the ability to think however we want to think. Okay? There's something actually far more important than freedom. It's called liberty. Liberty is the ability to live the life you've chosen for yourself. It is immensely American to be able to live the life you've chosen for yourself. And the ability to defend those choices is what the Second Amendment is about. The Second Amendment is there to preserve our liberty.
Yeah. Well, two thoughts that came to me as you were talking about that. Two experiences I've had. One, there's an individual on Twitter. His name's Carl. He's got a pretty large, he's very pro-gun, pretty large following on Twitter. And come to find out, he was a Democrat. He had a home invasion and was shot at home. And that really kind of turned him on to not be a victim and to learn more about gun ownership, become a responsible gun owner. And now he makes money off of Twitter by people complaining about the number of guns that he has. And so here's someone that really turned his life around because they didn't want to be a victim. The second one was this family that we knew when we lived on the west side of Washington, and she had a very similar thought as these Hindus that you were talking about. She had said something similar, that there's no way that she could take someone else's life to protect herself, as a way to protect herself. And I said, okay, what about your kids? Would you be willing to take a life to protect your kids if that was the option? And the answer was, oh, yeah, absolutely. I would do anything for my kids. And I think that's something that it comes to responsible gun owners is you do have a duty to protect yourself and protect your life and those that are dear to you if you choose to go down that path. And I'm very hopeful that more and more people are choosing to walk that path and to be responsible gun owners.
When I have people like, I could never take another person's life to save my own life, my response is always, why do you devalue your life so much?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine walking around where you believe that your life has no value? As a parent in particular, your life has an immense amount of value. You got young kids still. You need to be there for them. And heck, I got one kid that's grown up and one that's still growing up, but I got news for you. Even after they grow up, you still got to be there for them. It's your job, And so you need to value your life. And so I think, like, I've always said that if you really wanted to change the Second Amendment debate in this country forever, what you do is you arm all the soccer moms for 1 year. Arm them all. And then after a year, say, well, ladies, we're going to take the guns back from you now. See what their reaction is at that point. Because I don't think it's a political or philosophical discussion at that point. I think to them it becomes a biological discussion. Yeah. There is truly a mama bear gene. It exists. We know it. And, start messing with someone else's kid, you're going to find out about it, okay? And I think that if women in particular, who happen to be some of the largest anti-gunners, okay, right, if they understood the utility of that tool, if they understood how much safer it could make them and their kids, they would understand the importance of the Second Amendment. And if we should make inroads into that community, that is a huge soft underbelly of what I like to call the gun grabbers in this country. And that's a big segment of the naive ones.
Yeah. Well, again, I love this thought process, and I love this idea that there is hope on the horizon, not just for Washington State, but I think there's hope in the nation. Are there any gun laws specifically in Washington or in the nation that you see as this one thing can be very hopeful or is highlighting hope for the nation or for the state?
I gave a speech this summer at a few different political events, and it was called "The State of the Second Amendment." And it was here in Washington State. And so the premise of it is that if you look at the Second Amendment exclusively inside of Washington, you will truly believe that it is on it's on life support.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you take a more 35,000 foot view, which was what we do also on our channel, and you take a look at the Second Amendment on a national level, you will see quite a radically different story. We've gone from 12 constitutional carry states to now 29 in just 4 years. Okay. Every single Second Amendment issue or gun case that we had before the United States Supreme Court that we thought we had a chance of winning, we have won. The only one we've lost was Rahimi, and no one expected to win that case. And candidly, I think the court got that ruling right. I don't think the court blew it on that one. Let us remember that the NRA this year before the United States Supreme Court won a decision by a vote of 9-0. 9-0 for that. Let us also remember that every single ATF rule that has been promulgated under the Biden administration has all been struck down now.
Right.
Okay? So when we take a look at the Second Amendment on a national level, I would say that the Second Amendment is alive and well. When we take a look at it in certain states, it is definitely a dying breed. I think that the biggest thing that people need to be aware of is if we ever lose control of the United States Supreme Court, your Second Amendment rights will be taken from you. And if you don't believe me, all you need to do is go back and read District of Columbia v. Heller and read Justice Breyer's dissenting opinion. Because he made it very clear, and that's the roadmap that they will use, is that being a member of the militia is conditioned precedent to having an individual right to a firearm. And that's why you're seeing a lot of states also now passing laws to cut back on the type of training that they will allow people, this paramilitary training and things like that. This is all an effort to make sure that if they ever reach that, there will be no militias in states. That's their ultimate goal. Their ultimate goal is complete and utter civilian disarmament. And I use the term civilian disarmament because they win the labeling game all the time. Ghost guns, high capacity magazines, assault weapons. Well, we need to start using their tactics too. It's not gun control. You don't control an inanimate object. It's civilian disarmament. That's what it is. They're not ghost guns. They're unserialized firearms.
Yeah.
High capacity magazines are standard capacity magazines, and assault weapons are what we call semi-automatic rifles. We have got to start using the labeling game too.
I love that. And William, we're almost out of time. I told I think it was Alex that I wouldn't go over an hour.
He's on his way down here. We got a meeting, so he runs a tight ship,
So as we wrap up, where can people find you? I've obviously YouTube. What about Twitter? I've seen you on Twitter. Where else are you guys?
Okay, so you can find us on YouTube at Washington Gun Law. We're on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it this week at Gun Washington. I have a Facebook page, but Facebook is, in my opinion, worthless. We're on Instagram as well. And then I do want people to start checking out, and this is something I think you guys should take a look at too, a new social media platform out there called Trigger Hill. Trigger Hill is actually, the developers are in the Seattle area, and it is hosted on its own servers, and it's going to be a very pro Second Amendment platform because it's going to be a very pro First Amendment platform.
Awesome.
So we're kind of helping them get that off the ground. I would encourage Thin Line Defense and all of that to start checking out Trigger Hill. The more content over there, the better. And like I say, you're not going to get censored. So you can put up whatever you want over there, as long as you're not like, here's how to build a nuclear bomb. I was talking to the guy who developed, it's like, hey, there's got to be a couple of stipulations in there, but beyond that, yeah. But predominantly on YouTube. And listen, if people got video ideas, I'll be honest with you, some of the best videos I ever did weren't my ideas at all. I love to hear from the viewers because sometimes they got questions and I was like, God, I hadn't even thought of that. And then I realized someone said, recently said, hey, I put one of my weapons with an attached stabilizing brace into the amnesty form hopper, right? And now I want to get it out of there. How do I do that? Okay, well, I was able to look it up and did a video on it. And it's like, hey, for all of you who did this, here's how you get out of it.
Awesome. Well, again, William, thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for everything you guys do.
Yeah, man, we love it, and it was a truly geek out moment for me. So
I appreciate it, and I like you using the terminology "geek out" too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I think you go to SHOT Show every year, so hopefully we can.
I'll be there.
Go to SHOT Show. I'd love to meet you in person.
Yeah, if you guys are going to be down in SHOT Show, I'll probably be hanging out with Palmetto State Armory and Right to Bear this coming year. So, and I love it when people just come by and hang out with me and say hi and stuff. So, anytime, just come on by and say hi. I'd love it.
You got it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.